an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering the Dandelion Dynasty series, Book 3, The Veiled Throne, chapters 30, 31, and 32. Pit, Escape, and The Play. In these chapters, everybody is just so intent on destroying everyone else, and it's exhausting. Why are people like this? Why do we just do this over and over again? It's pitiful. I hate this. I hate this for us. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Kyle for commissioning this episode. Yeah, guys, I cannot get over, as I'm reading this, thinking about how many times throughout history we have, as a race, decided to treat other groups of human beings like this. And I am baffled at the fact that we have, it seems, never really learned our lesson. We have never seemed to grow beyond this. Even today, there is so much growth left to do, and it gets you wondering, is there a way out of this? Is this the human condition? Is this what we have to look forward to? Is that all there is? I didn't mean to start this as such a downer, but these are some bummer chapters for the most part. And I think the third chapter kind of helped to lift everything mostly. Just by sheer virtue of the fact that we weren't right in amongst the most oppressed people, or just sheer atrocities and death. But it starts off so rough, and it's so rough for 2 chapters straight that it was tough. So, okay. Let's start with Pit, chapter 30. This chapter starts off with the utter destruction of over a millennia's worth of, I don't even know, sacred texts, but also just all of the diaspora of a people being piled into a pit. And this is just so... Teams of priests, monks, and nuns, their faces haunted and robes tattered, carried out boxes of books from the temple and dumped them into the pit. Once in a while, if one of them slowed down or faltered, a Liuku overseer would step forward with a threatening gesture, and the poor wretch would flinch and hurry to complete the task. And all I can think about with this is Native Americans and how recently this kind of thing was being done. And especially, it's in the U.S. as well, but a lot of the focus has been recently on Canada and the schools, the boarding schools that Native kids were sent to, and all of the graves that were found at these schools. And the school's express purpose was to beat out of an entire people their own language, their own religion and culture and memory. And it was, like I said, so very recent. This is not hundreds of years ago, which is still pretty recent, by the way. No, it's not. And it breaks my heart reading. I've read this section, these 3 chapters, I read twice. And it was somehow worse the second time. So poor Timu is being put in the position where he has to not only put a torch to all of this history, but also make a speech denouncing the religion itself and the gods and the sages that came before, and talk about them as like liars who deceived us, and enforce to everyone that Ryukyu is the only language they should ever speak. We find out later when we are with Ghost Hanryoto that there is a kind of cruel trick that the guards will play on Dara people, and they'll speak to them in Dara, and if they reply in Dara, they will get beaten for it because they're supposed to only be speaking Ryukyu, so they're just like tricking them. The whole scene here is like, starts off with this piling up of this, this history, and then a Ningen falcon swoops in. And there's a real sense of this being the god Kiji maybe stepping in, which we know that the gods do sometimes. And they try not to be too direct with it. But sometimes they kind of are. Sometimes they'll just show up in a humanish form and have a fucking conversation, and will be like, hey, Thera, this is how sound waves work. And then they will disappear, which I feel like is just a different means of, it's not really the kind of direct action that interfering in a scene like this would be. It sidesteps it by just being like, I'm just sharing a little bit of information. I am not giving away secrets from the other side, like the, necessarily. I am just sharing a general principle of nature and how sound and light waves might be similar, versus I'm going to take definite sides and fuck things up for one particular person. So I'm not trying to blame Kiji here for not doing more. But I am going to say, Kiji, what did you think you were going to do? What were you hoping to happen here? Because this falcon swoops in, people recognize it as this symbol, and they begin to kneel and pray for help. And some of the Ryukyu begin to back down, thinking that this is obviously coming from the gods that they are about to defile, and it's a punishment. And Kutanrovo immediately is like, yeah, no, that's not this. And she comes at this bird. So she's yelling at everybody. Have you forgotten who we are? We don't rely on anyone but ourselves. And she uses her, what do you call it? Like her club, I guess, is all it is. And is beating the shit out of the priests, bashing their heads in, essentially, in front of this falcon, as if to... She's not even I thought she was going to try and beat up the falcon. And I'm sure she would if it felt like that was a possibility, but the impression that I'm getting, and it's hard to keep in mind how big these things are, but the draft of it, banking to the left at one point knocks her down. So they're pretty huge. I am going to assume she was well aware that trying to pick a fight with this bird was a losing battle. So she was just demonstrating to everybody that the bird does not mean shit. Look, we can beat these people to death, and what is that bird doing? Fucking nothing. But then we see that something flickered through the falcon's eyes. Despair? Pity? Horror? Just as Kutanrovo was about to swing the club in a useless gesture of defiance against the gigantic bird, it swerved away. And one of the abbots is kneeling and trembling. And Kutanrovo says, "Your God cannot save you." She swung her bone club and bashed in his skull. Kutanrovo needs to die. And I was extremely bummed later when we are with Tanvanaki alone. And she's thinking about how she considered having her assassinated, but she just couldn't bear to turn on somebody who had done so much for the Liuku people and who clearly just believed in the Liuku people. And I wanted to throw her words back in her face that she says to Timu here. He is begging her not to make him do this. And all of the stuff that they were going to burn now has the bodies of the clergy on top, the headless bodies. On the other side of the pit, the remaining members of Kiji's clergy knelt in neat rows. Behind them knelt the few ranked scholars still left. They had been wailing for so long they'd lost their voices or the will to continue. And Timu says, "I can't. You know that this isn't right. Can't you see how fucked up this is?" To which we have a moment of Tanvanaki seeming to hear him and she knows that he's right, but she doesn't feel that she has any other option. She says, "I can't be weak, and I can't allow my sentiment to destroy the dream of my people. If you want to save the rest of your people, you must do as I ask." And he has this weird look in his eye. And she sees him reach for his small knife and realizes that he is about to commit suicide. And she stops him and is like, "I know that you think that's going to put an end to this. It won't. If you die, here's what's going to happen. She's going to keep finding more traitors until everybody is pretty much gone. There will be nobody left to supervise on the irrigation system. There will be nobody to organize all of the distribution of food to the remaining villages. There will be rebellions and more killings, and this is going to look like fucking nothing. So your little attempt at martyrdom here is going to be utterly meaningless." And she doesn't call him a coward, but I feel like she was dancing around it, just basically being like, "You're going to try and, bounce up out of here and leave this problem to other people." And she's reminding him, the only thing that stands between Kutanrovo and that happening is you advocating for these people. Because she loves it. She would happily see every single one of you dead. Right now they're frightened and uncertain and enraged. Right now officials are terrified. Warapin and Nodami and I have figured out a way to give Kutanrovo what she wants without killing everyone. You are going to be saving some. And he fucking does it. I hated this so much. He tossed a lit torch into the pit and watched as the erupting conflagration consumed everything. A storm more violent than any in memory raged over Ukyutaasa for 3 days and 3 nights. In the torrential rain and typhoon-strength winds, houses caved in, mudslides buried villages, branches were torn from trees, and tides inundated coastal towns. Not even the great storm during the reign of one bright heaven when one of Mapidare's sons was lost in the sea could compare. But on the 4th morning, the storm abated. Based on reports by local officials, if the villagers hurried to plant, the harvest would only be mildly affected. Kutanrovo promptly proclaimed the storm was a sign from the gods of Ukyu that they approved of the effort to purge Ukyutaasa of Dararaki taint. Just as the storm washed away the old to make room for the new, the Liuku would scorch away the scars of native accommodation and grow a new paradise. And then we have a short interlude with the gods. A crackling noise ripped through the air as an old tree outside the temple of Pea, weakened by the storm, finally broke and toppled. What happened there, Kiji? No vengeance? No wrath? No determination to see your plan through? There was no response except the sighing of the wind and the screeching of faraway Mingan falcons, which just really did bum me out. Like, I'm hoping that the lack of response means I'm working on something else and don't have time for your bullshit. But it felt in the moment like I'm going to avoid talking about this because I don't have an answer for you. And I just I am not somebody who wants to depend on the intervention of gods, either in fiction or real life. But here is a time where I would be very pleased with that, please. Thank you. I'll put my pride aside to allow that to happen now. If we can just get it over with, because I can't take this anymore. These people, it's just too sad. It's just too sad. Oh, you guys. So then we go to chapter 31, Escape. And this, all right. This is such a bummer. Volu Aragaz. Remind me, guys, this is Takval's uncle, right? Because I had said that I did not trust this motherfucker. And I am hating the fact that it looks like he did just betray them. And I was right. And I hate it for so many reasons, but a lot of the hatred for me is coming from how much Thera is blaming herself. And it looks like maybe either it was not her fault at all, and it wasn't like some mistaken method. It was just straight up betrayal. But something has to happen to this guy. Like, what is it going to take? And this is the point where you start to be like, is any bad guy not going to wind up successful? And I understand, I completely do, that you need the bad guys to come out on top in order for there to be any tension at a certain point in the book. But my God, it just feels like I am getting nothing but one chapter after another of absolute domination by the baddies, whomever the baddies may be in that particular setting. And I'm so depressed. I'm so depressed in these books right now. Like, all right. So we start off with, things are already so bad. The entire village has basically either been burned to the ground or slaughtered or whatever. We've got 2 Garinifin left and like 30 people, maybe. I don't even think that many. And they're trying to, here it is. No, 60 plus refugees. That's right. 60. Okay. So they're figuring out how they're going to distribute the weight and how they're going to handle each Garinifin, because they have to move, but they're going to be visible. They're going to be up in the air. They're going to be vulnerable to attack. So what are we going to do? And the solution they come up with is that there is going to be one particular Garinifin that is stronger and going to be better it's going to be a faster, more maneuverable one for combat, and one that will be able to handle the weight of mostly the children is the one that's going on the other. And we have Thera noticing Radia and Toof. I kept calling him Toof because I kept forgetting how it's pronounced in the audiobook, but Toof is how he says it in the audiobook. looking at each other in a way that's sort of bothering her. And I really didn't think this was going to happen. It's unclear to me whether this is premeditated or if it is simply a last minute, like, just stab in the back. Because of Volu's betrayal, I feel like it might be premeditated, which sucks. But it also might just be a response to the way they've been treated as never being, like, fully integrated and trusted. I don't know what to think here, but the fact that they are giving each other this look here, either they made a plan real quick in the midst of everything, or they went into this knowing how they were going to handle it all. So they put the kids on the one, and Thera goes on the other, and she is with her husband. She hates being separated from her kids, but she does it because there's really not a better option for how to, like, distribute everything and make sure they're all in a position to be potentially safe. Because the way that they think it would go, were one of these Garinafin to be taken down, they think it would be the one that Takval and Thera is on, because that's supposed to be the defensive dragon, and the other one would be taking off while their dragon buys them time by getting into the direct conflict with the other. So, in their mind, they're putting themselves in the most danger and putting their children on the Garinafin with the riders that are the most likely to be able to bring them to safety. And it turns out that is not how it's going. So they're flying off, and she's noticing that the other dragon is falling pretty far behind. And when she turns around, it turns out that there is a fight that has broken out on the other one. And it has left that dragon without anybody directing it. So it's sort of just meandering and not keeping up. And it's To'of, and he is, like, trying to take down Vara, while Radia is, like, getting up behind her and trying to take her spot on the Garinafin saddle. And one thing leads to another. It looks for a second like Radia is just going to tumble off, but she catches the netting and holds on. But Vara gets thrown off the side. Tov catches her and asks her something more than once. And she clearly, like, it seems like he's trying to be like, why don't you just join up with us? And you could be part of our new crew or part of whatever's going on down there. And she just gives him the finger and spits in his face. And he's like, well, fine then. And he just lets go of her. And I cannot tell you, if there's, like, so much about this that I hate. First of all, the utter loss of both of Thera's children is killing me. Like, I know they're probably not dead. I don't know what we're going to do with them, but they're going to make, like, really good hostages if they decide to do something in that vein, which I have to imagine is the plan. And Thera is going to either do something that's probably not super wise to save her kids, or she's going to have to learn to shut her heart off and let her kids die. And I don't see her managing to do that. It's the kind of thing where I'm like, I want her to make the smart choice and do what's right for her people as a group, rather than being swayed by her own affection for her children in the theoretical sense. But I don't want Thera to be the kind of person who can just let her kids die either. That will cause her to cross over into being a kind of person that you don't really recover from. And I hate that for her. So I'm already thinking about this in terms of, like, what happens if they keep these kids. And I almost wish that they would be killed, because I feel like anything that they do is going to be such bad news later on down the line, you know? But I don't know. And she sees this fight happening, and they try to turn around to intervene. By the time they've like gotten turned around and have caught up, they're practically back above the site of their village burning. They're like right there again. And Takval pulls up and turns around again. And Thera is like, what are you doing? And she's screaming and crying. And he's like, babe, it's too late. There is nothing to be done. They are gone. And she keeps yelling for him to turn around. And he like lets her just kind of lose it. And then reaches back and squeezes her hand. And it says that it took her a long time to squeeze back. But I just, I hate this so much. I hate it so much. And also, like, all I could think about with the fight on the back of the Garinafin, I have such a bad time with heights. And the thought of this kind of fight makes me like watery in the knees, just the thought of it. And there's that part where Roddy is like holding the net and just dangling, and she manages to pull herself up. And I have never been somebody, even when I was in peak shape, who had the kind of upper body strength that could do a pull-up. Maybe if I was in a life or death situation and I got a real burst of adrenaline, maybe I could manage to pull myself to safety one time. And that's a really big maybe. I'm not confident on that one. However, nowadays, at the weight I am currently, I am not even able to support my weight hanging. Never mind trying to do a pull-up. The kind of grip strength you need to hold up like 280 pounds is intense. And I can't hold my weight on a bar just dangling. I immediately have to let go. And so all I could think with Radia hanging onto this like net was that it wouldn't matter if I was able to catch my grip on something at all. I wouldn't be like, I physically could not do a damn thing. That would just be a second's prolonging of my plummet to my death. This whole thing with, especially the way that Vara has like, is given the chance, it seems like, by To'of, and refuses, that kind of like badassery too, in the face of being dropped hundreds of feet to your death, and she's still just like, no, fuck you. I love that, but God, I don't know that I would have it in me. So this is when we go to the POV of Tenyo Roatan, son of Toluroru, oh my God, Toluroru Roatan, Toluroru. Pekyu of the Liuku and the voice of the gods surveyed the smoldering remains of the Aegon camp in Kiri Valley, as well as the bound captives kneeling before him, feeling very pleased. And he is thinking about his father, Pekyu Tenryo, and basically he is pretty resentful of the fact that his sister has been taken with his father to enjoy the glory that comes with taking down the Dara people. And there's like a sense of, I think my dad's probably dead. But even if he is, right now, we don't know that for sure, so it doesn't benefit me quite yet. And even if he is, he still picked my sister. And I'm just going to have to always know that, you know? I'm always going to know I wasn't the one that was worthy in his eyes. So, and he's thinking to himself, which I thought was interesting, if his dad just decided he was going to do this fucking crazy shit in Dara, because being PICU is boring and actually really tedious and it sucks. And he's like, I would not be surprised if the everydayness of this job just wore him down until he decided, you know what, fuck this, and bounced. And I thought that was a really interesting idea. Like, maybe, you know, I could see with a temperament like he has, that being really appealing. Maybe not the reason he chose to do it, but certainly it would make it more like appealing than staying, you know? So basically, Kuju is like, I am the one who has to stay and look after everybody. I have to do all the tedious, boring jobs and hold the fort down. And I do it. And I'm good at it. And I'm managing it. And I'm never going to get the kind of recognition I should, despite being pretty good at the job. And I think worthy of more than this. So he decides that he is going to, there's this moment too, his sister, I kept forgetting that Tanvanaki is like a nickname. Her real name was Vaju, because that is the name that she went by earlier on, I think this book, when we see her as a really young kid. And I just keep forgetting that. Had he not contributed just as much as Tanvanaki, oh, how he resented that nickname of hers. Why couldn't he get a splashy moniker like that? Just because she was such a show-off. And I was like, oh, right, I completely forgot that's like a whole thing. And I can't remember what Tanvanaki means. So if anybody out there remembers and wants to like comment somewhere and just be like, hey, this is what it is, to jog my memory, I would appreciate it. So at first, the fact that his father has gone away, he's like, oh, this is sweet. Now I can sort of like rule in his stead. I'm not officially Thane, but I'm like doing the job. And it says, Tenryou had taken with him his most loyal and powerful Thanes, leaving behind some of the best grazing rights, the most prized slaves, the most coveted titles. There was a power vacuum that demanded to be filled. Most important of all, Tenryou had taken away Tanvanaki, the rival Kuju had feared the most. Yes, his father had declared the arrangement to be temporary. Tenryou remained the Peikyu and would eventually either return in triumph or bring all the Ryukyu to live with him in paradise. But the failed expeditions earlier had shown how dangerous the way to Dara was, and how remote the chance that they would succeed. It was very likely Tenryou would never return. And Kuju is like, you know what I'm going to do? And he has his people that he trusts, one by one, take his siblings out. He handed out lavish gifts to shamans who demonstrated a particular talent for retelling the old tales with an eye towards pleasing a new master. He assigned the best grazing rights and slaves to tribes whose elders demonstrated a keen sensitivity to the political winds, who understood that a fresh storm was about to tear through the scrublands. 1 year after his father's departure, as directed by the plan based on Luanzia's calculations, he prepared a fleet of reinforcements. He was careful to staff the fleet with tribes who had been especially loyal to his father, with Thanes and Naros Votan he knew he could never win over, with particularly recalcitrant Aegon slaves. Kuju wasn't going to worry over much if they should decide to stage an uprising on the high seas. He even came up with the idea of sending the second expedition with a bigger supply of Garrinifin eggs and fewer adult Garrinifins so that there would be more room to ship away the people he didn't want around. So they eventually find the wreckage. And he initially is like, oh, maybe this is evidence that my dad didn't go through. But then they start to collect the pieces they find. And as he's looking through them, he is beginning to realize that the wreckage is all from the reinforcements. None of it appears to be from the original fleet that went through, which signifies that probably his dad actually managed to get through, and he doesn't really know how to handle that. And then we have an iceberg that shows up. And this is a really interesting thing. It's seen as like kind of a portent of goodwill from the gods. Let's see, I'm trying to find the spot where we have this. Traditionally, such icebergs were seen as curiosities, evidence of the capriciousness of the gods, but nothing more. But for Kuju, the iceberg presented a perfect opportunity. On the dry scrublands, access to fresh water was something that weighed constantly on the minds of everyone. Pekyu Toluroru, oh, that's going to be a tongue twister for me forever, Kuju's grandfather, had picked the shore of Aluro's basin to be the site of his taten for precisely this reason. The lake was the largest stable source of fresh water in all Ukyugonde. Even so, every season he had moved taten to another part of the lake to avoid wearing out the grazing or fouling the water. Which, that had never really occurred to me, that, like, if you're at a still body of water, yeah, you would have to move around because eventually it is going to start to get polluted. It's just like the byproduct of living nearby in a large group. And I'm sure, you get used to having to do this kind of shifting. And maybe you even look forward to getting away from an area that has started to be too lived in. But it just sounds like a bummer to me, After Tenryo had defeated the visitors from Dara, he moved taten to the coast of Pea Sea, where the city ships were anchored, because these island vessels now served as the most prominent symbols of his power, and he stopped roaming. However, there was a big problem with the new site. It lacked fresh water. Some shamans argued against the choice. Tenryo devised a system to have teams of Aegon and Dara slaves haul water back to taten from rivers and streams. And later, after most of the Dara slaves had died from overwork or the compelled combat sessions, their Togotten children, reminder, that means the children born of rape, took up the task, which I just cannot emphasize enough, you guys, how much this one sentence just dragged me down. After most of them had died from overwork or the compelled combat sessions, their Togotten children took up the task. Holy shit, that is a lot of misery contained in one sentence. I had to stop for a minute after reading that. I needed a moment. Even so, it was impossible to keep large herds of long-haired cattle or sheep around, and taten was forced to depend on a constant stream of tribute from all around Ukyugonde. And essentially, it's and it works, but it's not real dependable, and it's not something that everybody else looks on with respect, exactly. Because they're in a position where they are dependent on others, and also that they're staying in one place is a little bit too much like the Dara people who settle in one spot and just make buildings and stay there forever. So he is I don't really know what to do here, because I need these city ships to be in the background of everything to reinforce my position and remind everybody of who the fuck I am. But they're not wrong. Staying here is not working out, and I need to find something else. So what he decides to do is first he gathers up a bunch of his most trusted people in his tent, and they discuss something for a long time, and none of them are allowed to share it with anybody. That night, a flotilla of coracles, apparently heavily laden, rode to the iceberg. The warriors aboard belonged to the tribe of Tovo Tarisku, Kuju's most trusted thane. When they returned a few hours later, the coracles floated much higher in the water. The few Naros and Kuleks who woke up in the middle of the night and saw the returning coracles dismissed them as night pleasure cruises by youths with too much energy and time on their hands. In a few days, rumors began to spread that Kuju Roatan had been plagued by a persistent dream since the spring. In this dream, the Pekutaasa saw his father, Tenryo Roatan, riding on the back of a pure black Garinafin, heading into a raging storm over the seas. 3 goddesses acted as his slingshot scout, lookout, and spearwoman, forming a triangle of gold, white, and blue. Just before the Garinafin carrying the crew of 4 disappeared into the rolling clouds, Tenryo turned around and cried out to his son, "A gift!" Kuju, unable to make sense of this dream, had grown increasingly worried about the fate of his beloved father, the Pekyu. As the rumors spread and mutated, drawing sympathy from the Pekutaasa's predicament, 3 powerful shamans came forward to explain the Pekyu had failed to understand the message. The Pekyu was dead. The washed-up wreckage was proof. But Kuju's refusal to accept the truth, though understandable, was not helping. It's time for you to assume your station as the Pekyu. And so he pretends to be outraged. How could you even suggest that my father's dead? I'm going to send you to the iceberg. And if you really do speak the will of the gods, you'll still be alive in a month. And he sends them all off onto the iceberg. And everyone is just kind of like impressed at how devoted he is to his father. That despite all of this, he still doesn't want to take up the mantle of power. He's so loyal. And they're left out there for 30 days. And when they go pick them up, these guys look fucking healthy as a horse. And in parentheses it says, by now, no one could even recall Thane Tovo Tarisku's heavily laden coracles. Tasariku's heavily laden coracles. And I was like, oh yeah, I had forgotten about that too. Legit, as I was reading, I was like, oh right. And so Kuju is just like, oh my God, they're still alive. So you must be telling the truth. It's coming straight from the gods. The Pekyu is dead. Long live Pekyu Kuju Roatan. And so, tearfully and reluctantly, Kuju accepted that his father really was dead. And I just cannot, like, this is a really good idea. This is really, really well done. I'm not even mad. Like, pretty fucking solid, man. And then we come back to the present and him saying, you've done well. And he offers some food to the man genuflecting before him. And Volyu Aragaz says, thank you. It's an honor to share a meal with you after the destruction of the faithless rebels. And it's Volyu Aragaz. And I'm just like, you piece of shit. Ugh, I am disgusted. So then, we go to chapter 32, the play. And this is, I'm going to sort of have to rush through this a little bit. But what we're doing here is we start in the present and we meet this kid, Kinri, who is a assistant to a woman who like works at this huge sort of restaurant outdoor dining area, the Splendid Urn. And then we jump back in time and we find out that this is Savo Ryoto, Ghost Hun's son that was allowed to escape after having been taken in and given, what's the word I want? Refuge, I suppose. Just as the rescuers were about to bring the young man to the refugee camp, a doctor passed on the beach. He was a lanky young man in a green cape, and his kind face instantly made you want to trust him. The doctor gently pulled away the thick blanket wrapped around the half-frozen castaway lying prone on the sand. He gazed into Savo's eyes and whispered, "You've had a long journey." Savo nodded, unsure what to say. His teeth chattered, but it wasn't just from the cold. The doctor put his ear on Savo's chest and leaned over his face. His hand reached inside Savo's robe, pressing against his racing heart. "Before the sea, all men are brothers," the doctor whispered. Then he pulled his hand out of Savo's robe and held up a folded square of silk. He opened it to reveal the tiny wax logograms written in precise clerical script. "Ah, his name is Kinririto. This is an official passport issued by the authorities in Fossa, giving him free passage all over Thera." And Savo is just like, yo, what? How did he get this document? And that's got his Thera name on it? And I'm like, oh, right, this is one of the gods. Right. I keep forgetting how they're taking an interest in like a lot of the sort of outside options because things are so bad in the midst of it that they're trying to develop options from the outside. So they have looked on Savo and been like, what can we do with this guy? And it makes sense because like Savo has said a couple times how he doesn't understand how he's still alive. He should have died frozen in the water, but he had a weird warmth in him that he doesn't really understand. And I'm like, oh, okay. So that was from like just fucking literally divine intervention. So he is given a job at the Splendid Urn, just doing like various like small tasks. And the woman who works there is like offering to make him some food that he has never tried before. And it's just touching for him the way that he has been taken in and really treated well. And he is so surprised by how little the Thera people he is meeting are anything like the way Thera people were described to him. And we eventually have him going, like he's sent on this errand. He's looking through all of the cool stalls and stuff in the market streets. There are some really fun things that are mentioned here, but I don't have time to get into all of them. And eventually he comes upon an old woman who is claiming that she can teach this bird to steer a weird cart through a little maze that has been built. And there is a sort of pillar the cart's attached to that he says is really out of proportion to the rest of the cart and just sort of looks weird. And she is watching them assemble this maze, like kind of out of the corner of her eye, while this other woman does this big speech, while this lady does something under the tablecloth that you can't see, and then lets it go, and the cart moves seemingly on its own, seemingly pulled by the bird, but he does not believe it has anything to do with that. And it goes through the maze, and he is just absolutely baffled as to how they made this happen, and he's trying to figure it out. And I'm wondering if this has to do with magnets or something. I don't know what it would be that she was doing under the tablecloth. I really don't have like a good theory on this at all. But I have to assume this is going to turn out to be something that's like pretty important. And then we go inside a carriage and we have an argument happening between Aya Mazzotti and Princess Thera. And Aya, who is supposed to be like guarding her, is arguing with Thera, who wants to be able to go out into the market by herself because she wants to be able to like see things as a regular person. And if she has too many guards around her, nobody is going to like talk to her. She's not going to be able to enjoy herself. Aya kind of accuses her of being like, oh, you mean that like boys won't flirt with you? And she's like, come on, you fucking know that's not what it's about. And besides, I don't recall you having a problem with boys the last time that we went out together. So they go back and forth a little bit. Finally, Aya agrees to let her go by herself. And we have a sort of another intervention with the gods, where the bird flies out of its cage and gets in Farah's horse's face and causes it to rear up. And oh my god, I keep like forgetting his name because it goes back and forth between calling him Savo and Kinri is the name he's going by now, so I'm gonna try and keep using that. Kinri goes up and like calms her horse and is looking at her like she is the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. What the fuck? So this is obviously the gods like kind of pulling them together. And there's also an interesting moment where he sees a bunch of people that are like waiting outside of a stall, and there's no written word. There's just a symbol of like a tongue licking wax. And he asks this guy like, wait, what does that even mean? And he calls it, the man he asks says, can't you see his sign? He has a knife tongue, a paid litigator. Yo, knife tongue. That is baller. I love that fucking name. I love this. I love this so much. And it turns out that this is a guy who just works on behalf of the fucking poor and destitute and gets paid back in favors if they don't have money to stand up to like landlords and bully government officials and whatnot. And this dude tells like a couple stories of this guy like having the backs of people who were being completely fleeced. And I cannot wait to learn more about this dude. So he gets like sort of interested in this and then gets distracted by some cheering. And this is all like before he runs into Farah. I jumped ahead a little bit because I just wanted to like talk about the ways in which they're clearly being pushed together. But he gets to see a little stage play depicting the fight between Pecutenrio and Ginmazoti. And I think that this is a smart bit of story crafting from Ken Liu, because it is not only showing us his reaction to this history, but it's also reminding us of some of the key moments and how things went. You know, I don't remember it all. It's been a while. These books are so dense that keeping track of everything can be really tricky. So he watches this and he's kind of flipped out at the way they are depicting Pecutenrio, because he is so used to the Pecu being the hero and the Dara people being depicted as like underhanded and shifty and evil, that seeing it in a complete inversion is like offensive to him in a way. And he's genuinely kind of shook. And it's really interesting to see how he can be living in and amongst the Dara people for this long, and he can understand that what he's been taught about them isn't necessarily true, but he is still believing the old versions of a story he was told. And this is very believable to me, because that's sort of how our minds tend to work, is like we can accept an evidence of a certain thing, but we don't necessarily ever turn and apply it to other parts of our lives, whether it's just because of not really having like the critical thinking, or because we are low-key aware it will change the way we look at this other thing and we don't like that. And so we don't want to. And so the idea that he's been taught that a lot of what the Liuku circulate about the Dara people isn't actually true by the tutor that he had. And then living amongst the people has taught a whole like other version of that same lesson. But it's not until this moment that he really begins to be like, wait, this was, does that mean everything else isn't true either? And I fucking relate, kiddo. There is just nothing quite like the moment that you stop and go, oh my God. Well, that means everything isn't what it is it? And this was my moment, and I've mentioned this before, was at about the halfway point of the new Jim Crow. And I suddenly just stopped and went, oh my God, it's all a lie. It was just there. The evidence presented in that book is done so in such a dispassionate and such an intricately structured and supported way with multiple sources. There was simply no way to refute it at all. And everything it pointed to was so fundamental to other aspects of life that I accepted, that if you messed that up and shook that up, there was no way for the rest of the building to stand at all. It was just a matter of time over the course of the next couple of years that I would pursue one point and bring it all the way up to another thing and be like, oh my God, so that means that's bullshit too. And once that starts, it's so scary. It is so upsetting. It's the same thing as like as a woman and you begin to understand the fundamentals of sexism and patriarchy and the way that works. Once you see it, it's not like you want to go back to not knowing, but once you know, it ruins so much for you that you sort of envy people who are still operating with like the simplified version of things. Does that make sense? You don't want to be ignorant anymore, and you would never choose to go back. But there is a part of you that does envy people who don't seem to really get it, because you remember how simple and comforting that felt at the time. So I just really felt for him in this. So anyway, this is when we go to Farah, and she is like thinking about everything she knew about Gin Mazzoti's life being really sort of like academic and dry, and seeing it depicted in this play was a lot more moving than she expected. And she's wondering why the Imperial troupe does not ever like put on plays like this. And I was like, I am gonna guess that that's probably because of Gia. I'm not positive, but I would think. And this is when the two of them sort of get shoved together. And it's sort of weird. There's an ending here. In Ginpen's temple square, 4 hushed voices whispered to one another. Are you sure? The resemblance is uncanny. With my art, it'll be perfect. Do you really think this is our best chance? Maybe it's a sign for us to meet him. Don't you want to see what's inside those cliffs before you die? How are we going to get him to agree to this? Let's begin by getting to know him. I'm like, is this the gods, or are these, I'm assuming it's the gods, but I'm not positive about that. Man, I am out of time, and I haven't even gotten a chance to cover chapter 33. I'm going to have to kind of do this quickly, but I mentioned already about Ghostan and how she was, this poor guy thought she was trying to trick him into speaking Dara, and she is really not down with what is going on with, we know she has already been a lot more lenient with her kid about learning Dara speech and art and whatnot. Everything Kutan Rovo is up to, she's like, this is garbage. And she's heading into this village, and she sees a gang of Liuku children and Dara prisoners. And she finds out what these guys are planning to do is release the prisoners hobbled into like this open area and then let the children hunt them down. And Ghost Town is like, you're what? And the guy says, well, we don't have like the hunting grounds we would use to train Ryukyu kids back home, so we have to come up with something. And she's just like, this is not the Ryukyu way. This is a complete perversion of what our traditions are. Trying to say this is tradition, this is disgusting. And she basically takes the prisoners away from the Naros and is like, they're mine and you're not doing that. And they're like, we're going to have to tell Kutanrovo about this. And she's like, you do whatever the fuck you need to do, but I'm doing what the fuck I need to do. And she leads them into Vokufurna's old mansion, the one he had to vacate once Kutanrovo shamed all the Ryukyu into abandoning native dwellings. And she goes in. She doesn't know what she's going to do with the prisoners. They're following her in. And when she goes to this like main area, she finds him, Voku, in the cellar, burying a bunch of valuable Dara artifacts. Silk scrolls, paper codices, Zamaki figurines, bronze ritual vessels, paintings, statuettes of native gods. And she looks at him. He says something like, I rescued these from the homes of native officials. And she gives him a look and he's like, all right, maybe not all of it. Maybe some of them are from the Temple of Kiji. Temple of Pea. He's calling it by the Dara name. Can't be doing that. And Ghost Town is like, dude, if Kutanrovo finds out what you did, and he says, I mean, I can't help it. I can't let us destroy all of this stuff. This is gorgeous, irreplaceable treasure. And then she tries to be like, well, what does it have to do with you? You can't risk this. And he points to the prisoners and he's like, how about you? And she basically says the exact same thing. I couldn't help it. To see the defenseless die for no purpose, to hear her filling the heads of children with perverted traditions. And Voku's like, yeah, see? We both can't stomach this shit. And he says that he got the idea from like the pirates that bury their shit. And he's like, no one will think to look down here. And someday maybe we'll be able to pull all of this out again. And we'll be really glad that we still have them. I get the feeling you're also digging down here in part because you don't want to be outside. It's a depressing sight out there, isn't it? Said Voku. Sometimes I just want to hole up down here and chew a few Toleuza berries and forget about all of the Kutanrovo's follies. And honestly, this was such a nice moment in the midst of all of this horror. I was like, knowing that there are some people resisting and really grossed out by it helped. It really did. And this is when we go to Tanvanaki, and she does not know what to do about Kutanrovo. She can't kill her. She's not up to it. And she's having to ask for more, contributions from the mainland. But she feels like it's just weakening her. It's making her look pitiful. The fact that they're not able to be self-sustaining is going to come back and bite her, but she doesn't know what else to do because they're going to starve otherwise. And now Kutanrovo was leading troops in war games in farming fields, trampling crops and ruining the livelihood of entire villages. And I'm just like, look, you really should kill her. It's just sentiment that's keeping her from doing it. Turning on her, a Thane who had given so much of her life for the hope of a better future revolted her. And this wasn't a contest of succession. Kutanrovo was, in her own twisted way, trying to do what she thought was best. Yeah, but she's ruining your plans. Kill her. Kill her. And look, I know that's not just a solution, because her being the spearhead of this movement that's really doubling down on oppressing the Dara people, getting assassinated is going to have a backlash. I'm not going to pretend it's not. It's going to be a problem. But it will also be a way to step in and keep everybody from fucking starving to death, which I think is more important. So, yeah, she decides in the end that she's just going to like ask for more tribute, and that's how she's going to deal with it. And I was like, girl, I guess. It seems I think it's a mistake. But I'm also like, all right, well, you kind of suck though. So maybe make a mistake. Maybe I'm fine with that. We're going to have to wait and see. But I hate this. I'm so uncomfortable. Like, I hate watching it all go down as brutally as it is. It's just painful, you know? So, oh man, I'm going to have to listen to the next chapters like right away because I need to know. All right, guys. Well, I'm going to wrap up here. Thank you again, Kyle, for commissioning this. Really appreciate you. I am going to have another episode next Tuesday, which will be November 1st. Oh, can't believe October's almost over. This is crazy. But yeah, I really hope that y'all are enjoying the coverage. And until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.